Hi everyone, I'm Rob King and today we have our retrospective on the Mangrove Jack's Bavarian Wheat, and it has been an absolutely fabulous drink. Just look at that carbonation for a start, and a lovely frothy clear head, and taste has been wonderful. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Today we are going to look at the schedule, the vital statistics, the costs and price per pint, and of course the lessons learned. But before we start on that, we're also going to look back and re-evaluate just how good this little drink was. Carbonation, nice head. So, colour crystal clear, perhaps a surprise for a wheat beer. You might have expected it to be a little cloudy, however absolutely wonderful in terms of the clarity. Nice fluffy foamy head, absolutely wonderful, and the aroma. It is quite rich now. This is 6 weeks later, and you do get that vanilla, those cloves, and that hint of biscuity malt. Aroma is absolutely wonderful, and let me jump on to my favourite bit, tasting. This is lovely and cold. The carbonation really makes it pop. It is very smooth. There is no bitterness really in the aftertaste, and you do get a delicious lingering taste to it. Mouthfeel is pretty light really. You might expect it being a wheat beer to be a little thicker, but it's really not. Yes, this is a wonderful summer drink. Well, anytime drink to be honest, and the sun has come out, so this is perfect. Spring is here. Starting then with the schedule, of which there are two. The first, which I carbonated in the keg, was all done and ready within 3 weeks, with 10 days in fermentation, 4 days for cold crash, and then simply a week under pressure to carbonate. And it turned out wonderfully. Bottle carbonation though did take just a little bit longer, with the same 10 days in fermentation, 4 days in cold crash, and then a couple of weeks at a warmer temperature while it bottle carbonated, and then just a week in conditioning for the final result. Now this is 6 weeks later, and the re-evaluation has been delicious. Vital statistics were pretty simple. We were looking for an ABV of 4.7%, and there was 23 litres straight into the fermenter. This all came together and resulted in a final gravity of 1.016 versus a target of 1.020. So we ended up just undershooting the ABV and came out of 4.2%. And very delicious it is still. I have had a bad run with kits, and this one absolutely wonderful, highly recommended. My favourite topic though is show me the money, and just exactly how much did this cost and what is the price per pint. Now this was a bit of a bargain. It was actually a Black Friday deal where I got the kit plus a beer enhancer all for a bargain price. So majority of the price, £23, really was all of that, and there was very little more to add. Now, the one thing that I do add, of course, is use bottled water instead of tap water. So this is a personal choice. I do prefer that over my particular tap water, but that does add a little bit to the cost. But on balance, it was an 80-20, with 80% on the kit and just an additional 20% of costs coming from the water. There was a small additional cost, 26 pence, for the wonderful carbonation that ended up in the bottles. I think I've mentioned before how impressed I was with this carbonation. Cheers. Bringing this all together for the final price per pint, this was £29.55 in total costs and 22.8 litres in the bottle or the keg. This all means that the end result was 74 pence per pint. Wow! Meaning this little 330 was just 43 pence. Cheers. This is probably one of my favourite value for money. You cannot beat that price per pint at all, and I am still impressed. In terms of rankings though, with only 2 beers in the bag so far, this is behind the California Common, but I do have to say the California Common was something particularly special. And we arrive at the lessons learned, and this is a game of 2 halves, because not only did I learn several lessons from the beer itself, but this was also the first time I've recorded anything in 4K, so I have a few 4K related lessons learned to also add to my normal update. Lesson number 1 is the volume of water used. This is a 23 litre batch, but there were already 3 litres of liquid in the kit, so we only needed 20 litres of water in the preparation for this kit. Lesson number 2 is the kit itself and the viscosity of the liquids. Easy to distribute into the fermentation vessel, really simple to mix in. They were wonderful. And lesson number 3, exactly the same for the beer enhancer. Clearly an important addition in the final result of this brew. Also, really low viscosity, so it's easy to add to the fermenter. All in all, what a fantastic kit. Lesson number 4 is the cold water used in the top-up. Now I stored all of the water in the garage, and it's winter time, so it was particularly cold. This played to my advantage because after adding boiling water to mix in the liquid malt extract, it was very hot. But by the time I added all of that very cold water, we were fine for the temperature range. It was coming in at 19 degrees centigrade or thereabouts. Perfect for pitching the yeast. However, in practice, if that water had been room temperature, I think the temperature would have been too high to pitch the yeast straight away. So something to just pay attention to when you're doing this yourself. Lesson number 5 was the mention in the recipe that the yeast was very low flocculation. Now actually, as it turned out and where weekends fall, it ended up with 4 days in cold crash. But I think that worked to my advantage. That is what helped with the clarity. I think without that there would have been a little bit more of a cloudy impact on the final recipe. Now lesson number 6 is a bit complicated in terms of keg versus bottle. Now I'm very happy with the bottle carbonation, so highly recommended. I was also very happy with keg number 1. I have 2 8-litre kegs which I used in this homebrew. And the first one, really good, as I mentioned. The second one though, for some reason, just did not work out quite so well. I did end up increasing the pressure for a little while to increase the carbonation, and this did, although it took some time, this did help. But initially, keg number 2 was a bit of a disappointment. After another week at 20 psi though, we did get there. And that leads neatly on to lesson number 7. The reason that keg number 2 was a bit of a problem was probably due to a bit of a sticky flow control valve on my Nuka tap, and perhaps that was causing some of the issue I had with carbonation. I do know that as you dispense the beer, incorrect settings can decarbonate the beer as it's coming out, and you've got to try and let it flow as quickly as possible. So I'm not exactly sure whether it was the tap, the carbonation, the keg, or whatever, but keg number 2 was a little bit of a problem. Lesson number 8 is my wonderful Nuka tap, or it can be wonderful, but as we saw in this recipe, that it did cause me a little bit of a problem. It wasn't the tap, it was the flow control valve, but nonetheless it really can impact the quality of the final dispensed beer. And so we had a 4K filming experience. It did cause me a few problems. It was a different setting on app on the camera, and overall it did cause some extra headaches. So there were some new lessons learned as we went through this process. So lesson number 9 is there is a much closer attention to detail when setting up the camera for filming. It did go out of focus a few times and there were lots more settings. I'm still getting used to it, and there were a few other mistakes along the way. So lesson number 10 then is the auto settings, which are very easy to knock off, ending up with auto white balance going all over the place, which happened a few times without me realizing. Very easy to take the auto settings off, which when you're just one person filming yourself and what you're doing, they are quite important. Which brings us to lesson 11, the time lapse, which for bottling and for capping is particularly useful, and for 4K you want to reduce a little bit of your storage requirements. Unfortunately the time lapse was 1 frame per minute, which was far too slow. That was a bit of a cock up really. I need to make sure the settings are correct next time around. And finally, lesson number 12, and a useful additional feature, is with 2 devices you can also set up a monitoring system, so you can film from one device and also monitor on another, something I've never had before. It doesn't quite seem completely stable, but did work for some of the time. As a single video editor all by myself in putting this together, that was a useful advantage, once I get used to using it of course. So I've nearly run out of beer, I need to go for a top up, and that is our lessons learned concluded. Thank you very much for watching. Please do like and subscribe, please do comment, I would love to hear from you, and thank you Mangrove Jacks for restoring my faith in kits, because this one was fab.